Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today. The title of today's webinar is 3 Simple Steps to Integrate Oracle EBS with Small 2.0 Single Sign-On. Our presenter today is Greg Wendt, who will introduce himself in just a moment, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager over PathLock, and if you have any audio issues during this webinar, you can click on preferences and then audio. From there, you can check to see if you're using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming from your speakers. This presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. There will be a Q&A following the presentation, so please type any questions into the Q&A chat box for people to answer at the end of the event. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Greg.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. So as she said, yes, my name is Greg Wendt. I'm an executive director of the security solutions here at PathLock. So I come into the PathLock team with the merger of Appsian, which I'll just go into in a few minutes. But when we talk about the agenda here briefly, what we'll start with is an introduction and then the evolution of single sign-on, and then also the ease of a native SAML solution and integrating SAML into the Oracle EBS solution. Also demo, kind of talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of a customized versus a commercial delivery type of solution, and also some hints and tips and any sort of questions as well. Also, if you have any questions during the session today, you can submit them via the question panel on the GoToWebinar control panel, which is normally on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, you could email us at info@pathlock.com as well. So a little bit about Appsian and how we're now part of PathLock. You can see it's really been kind of a large merger of many different organizations. So, Greg Heller, which was Appsian, started back in 2005. We've also included Q Software, SaaS Solutions, Security Weaver, Expandian, PathLock, CSI Tools, and we're now part of PathLock. So it's a very large group, and what we're able to do with that is really extend the solutions that we're able to provide to a lot of our customers. So you can see, the different areas that we kind of touch on. Q Software does a lot of things with JD Edwards, for example. SaaS is SAP focused, but on application security, and they have code scanning capabilities, for example. So the PathLock repository for tools and solutions has gotten much, much larger. So what we're going to be talking about today is really that touch base into the EBS side that comes with the acquisition and the grouping from Appsian. So with that, what we are is a market leader, our market leading controls automation platform. You can see some of our customers and also some of our partners that we work with down there. So we also have grown significantly as a company because of this merger. So we've got over 500 employees around the world as well. So that's just a little bit about PathLock. So let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. So why single sign-on? What are the reasons behind it? When we think about that, it really boils down to a lot of the legacy systems are facing modernization challenges. If we think about, we've seen this on the PeopleSoft side as well as on the EBS side. When we ended up with COVID, for example, many people ended up going home. They needed to be remote. They couldn't be in the office anymore. And it's been difficult to get some of those employees back to the office as well. They don't want to come back into the office. So you're having access points that you really weren't used to supporting for a very long period of time. And it's really being forced by the modernizations required for that diverse workforce, because it's going to be a variety of form factors. You're going to have increased exposure because of all those different access points of where this system is now available where it wasn't before. Some of the static access controls that were in place, that's another thing that really was a drastic change for many organizations during COVID. They figured out a lot of those rules didn't necessarily work, and some of the policies and procedures of what they had in place became a real bottleneck for them when they tried to move quickly to implement and support a remote workforce. It became very challenging and left them with security holes in place. And then also the multiplication of the enterprise applications. I've talked to numerous different people, but it's one of those things that many orgs are really looking at point solutions that specialize in solving a particular problem. And you go with best of breed on that little point solution. You don't have to replace your entire ERP. You interface back to it. So now you end up with connections in and out of all of these other applications. If you think about HR, for example, and what an employee goes through from an onboarding perspective, what do I need to, set up? What information do I need to provide? How many touch points do I have? It could be extensions of 401 benefits, employee health plans, all those different touch points. And, some of those are on your network, some of them are off of your network. And typically they're tied in with some sort of single sign-on event, which is one of the reasons why if you have to re-authenticate all of these different systems, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge, and it really shows a more uncoordinated security approach. Because of that interaction of multiple different application sets, for example, and where your employees are working, if they can move in and out of applications very easily or seamlessly through single sign-on, it's proven that they're actually going to be more, there's going to be better collaboration between the employees because they're going to do that. They're going to jump in and out of the apps and not have to be concerned about it. So with that, when we think about single sign-on and what it really boils down to is it allows you to have a centralized system for identity trust. It really gets a one-stop shop from that perspective as to where your information is going to be stored. And it allows multiple applications to use that same login because you're able to trust that identity source. So once that user authenticates to that one source, then they can go into many different applications, validating against that identity store. And since the passwords are stored in that one location, it becomes much easier to turn them all off, basically. And that application normally does a very good job of enabling controls and adaptive security, whether that's multi-factor or complex password terminologies and rules and all of those types of things. So all of those things together really allow you to control the application in a much better way because it's going to allow you to have that centralized interface. Some of the advantages of that centralized identity provider is it's really that single point for servicing all of the credentials for the user. So if somebody leaves, onboarding, offboarding, movers, if you've got a scenario where you think somebody might have given up their password in a phishing attack, you can actually go to one particular location and change that password or lock the account or, remove the account or, those types of things. And that stops all of the applications that subscribe or authenticate to that particular identity provider. The users aren't going to be able to get into any of those anymore at that particular point in time. So that's one of the real big advantages to that centralized identity provider is it really gives you a quick and easy way to alleviate much of the maintenance that's required in each of these target applications. And as I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, that unified set of rules for password complexity and expiry. Many of these target ERP applications in this particular point, EBS, was it really written with fantabulous security controls that are the best under the planet? Probably not. It was built to do a certain function. It was designed to do business functions. It wasn't necessarily designed as a, having the best password management system out there. So when you can plug into a best of breed solution to handle your identity, it's much easier from that perspective. So, in the history and aging, I can remember back when I was working for organizations, typically, you have your own set of passwords into dev, test, stage, QA, and then, production might be a different password because it's actually a true running production environment, but all of the other different environments, you never changed your password in them. You just logged right in and you probably had the same password across every single one of them. Why? Because you couldn't remember it, especially if you were dealing with, multiple different verticals. So you end up with a password history, and being able to track that password history will make your password stronger, and being able to age them out and those types of things. And that's another big reason for enforcing authentication to that identity provider. On the flip side of it is too, there's going to be a lot less work involved for most of your organization. It really is about reduced work at the service desk, because if somebody has that one particular user ID and password, and say you have 10 or 15 or 20 different applications that actually authenticate against that identity provider, that's 20 different passwords that you don't have to remember. It's much easier to be able to go in and do that at that one layer. So it really does make it a lot easier on the end user, or the consumer of the single sign-on in this particular situation, and the organization as a whole. And it's one of the reasons why, from a maturity perspective, implementation of single sign-on is something that's looked at as far more mature from a security model, because it does help you, move towards that passwordless future, but it also puts so many more controls back into the hands of the people who really need it, rather than spending so much time, oh, this particular person got phished. Now I have to reset their password in dev. I have to reset their password in stage and test and production, and every other copy of the systems that are out there that we're working on for testing and upgrading and all those types of things. So there's a lot of work involved with all of that when you think about, what happens when a somebody gives up their credentials. So when we think about the process flow of, IDP initiated SSO, and we can either do SP or IP initiated in this scenario. So the real difference comes down to the fact of, has that user really authenticated to the identity provider first? That's going to be the main differentiator for the end consumer themselves. So when we're kind of walking through this, what's going to happen is that end consumer is, let's say they're logging into EBS for the very first time. They haven't authenticated to any other, corporate resource or company resource, anything like that. At that particular point, they're then going to be forced to put in their credentials from the identity provider. In the demo you'll see today, I'm actually going to be utilizing ADFS. So in that scenario, since it is that first touch, that first connection, they're gonna have to put in, their authentication for Office, for ADFS. They're not authenticating with, user ID and password into the target ERP system. They're authenticating with their identity provider password. The other option is, in the scenario of, yes, I have already created or already authenticated to the identity provider. In this scenario, it could be as simple as I'm logging in to check my email, do something like that, where I've already created that session with ADFS. Once that session is already established, then I can seamlessly move in and out of any application that subscribes to SSO with that provider. And that's what we really do in that scenario, is we build that connection to allow EBS to support those types of identity models. So when we have a native SAML solution, it really is about that handler and how it's going to plug into your environment. So, it's commercial, it's off the shelf, it's just a web server plugin. I'll go a little bit more into the architecture on the next slide, so I'm not going to cover off too much of it now. There's no real customizations. We do load a project into the EBS system, which you'll see a little bit of here, and support and maintenance are included in the subscription model that you can go into. So when we really look at the security platform, what we have is a plugin that's going to sit inside of the EBS web server. I do want to call out, from a support perspective, the version of EBS that we're working with. That would be EBS R12.2.x. So that's the version that we can support. Anything over 12.2 for the single sign-on. And what happens is, inside of the web server, there is a plugin that does get installed, and that plugin is going to be the one that, through our security platform, is going to be able to communicate back to the identity provider. So there's some configuration, there's some forms inside of EBS that allow for the configuration of, how do I communicate with this particular identity provider. So what happens is that configured identity provider is then communicated with, and depending upon the user passing their authentication, that's how they're going to be allowed into the application set as a whole. So very streamlined, really efficient, just allows you to really offload that authentication validation to the identity provider in that situation. So I'm going to go ahead and start a demo up here real quick. I'm going to switch my screen over here just a little bit. And I'm going to start up Firefox here real quick. Not now. So I am going to go ahead and put in a URL. And what this URL is going to do is it's going to allow me to hit a particular EBS application, and I'm requesting a deep URL embedded into EBS. So I'm opening up my home page basically to where I can have access to all of the different functionality that I have been given, you know, authorizations for at that particular layer. So I'm going to end up with still my normal authentication, my normal access, my normal controls. So I'm really just offloading that. So as I hit enter here, what's going to happen is it's going to happen extremely quickly, but we're going to go ahead and check that. So our security platform is going to receive the request. It's going to see that this user has not authenticated into EBS. So it's going to immediately check with the configured identity provider. In this case, it's going to be ADFS. And I do not have an ADFS session established because I just started up this browser session. So as I hit enter, very quickly, it's going through. Now I'm already redirected over to the identity provider. I'm going to go in and put in my credentials for the identity provider. Once again, this is to ADFS. To authenticate. So once I populate those credentials and pass the authentication request, the nice part about it is the authentication request has to complete completely. So it's the scenario of if that's user ID password, and that's okay, then it comes into the user. If it's user ID, password, and then also multi-factor, those steps would have to go through as well before it would complete the authentication request and hand the attribute value over to us. Because what happens is there's an attribute value that comes from ADFS that helps map the user inside of the EBS system. So, you know, from a single sign-on perspective, that's really the power of it. And it's very simplistic from a demo flow because it really is something that allows you to, you know, just access the application very quickly. Something that I'm going to do here is I'll show you some of the configuration screens. So I'm going to go under the system administration and I'm going to come under the apps and security. One of the things that you'll notice here is, yes, this is one of the touch points that we do have inside of the application. So I'm going to just go ahead and open up one of these pages, and it's always fun to see this work on a Mac. So see if we can get this up and running here, and yes, we got it. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that screen. So when I look at the apps and security, there's a couple of different areas that we can look at here. I wanted to start with, first off, we have a couple of different areas. So I'm going to look at, I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go to identity first. So from an identity perspective, I've got a couple of different controls and options. One of them is going to be my provider, and then also the user mapping rules. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the provider here real quick. I'm just going to enter that and run this real quick. So I've got a couple of different identity providers here configured. We can actually toggle back and forth between either Okta or ADFS in my demo system very quickly. But what I was using in this example, the ADFS system. So I'll go ahead and kind of walk through that configuration. What you've got here is basically where am I going to communicate? How do I communicate with the identity provider? What is the URLs? All of those types of things. Also, do I have any sort of other information like generating a signature, or what type of assertion validations do I need to do? Any of those types of things. So there's some other parameters that we've got on this as well that allow us to set up that configuration. You'll see if we kind of toggle back and forth, all right, between the SAML and the Okta, or the ADFS and Okta, you can see that yes, there are some different responses. The URLs are going to be completely different. The identity is going to be different because that's what's required to actually populate that information. So this helps build the configuration of what identity provider am I going to communicate with moving forward. So very streamlined from that perspective. Once that configuration is there, you also need to do some user mapping. And what the user mapping does is it allows me to understand what attribute value is coming from the identity provider. So what is ADFS going to give me that's going to map to the user inside of the system? So I can have, a setup for Okta, I can have a setup for ADFS. In this example, you can see that they are different. I'm using email address in one, and I'm using username in the other. So two different attributes, two different ways to communicate, all set up and controlled within our delivery from that perspective. So once that is done, what we have to do is we have a policy set. That policy set really allows us the control to have particular rules running in production. So we are running this A config is our current one. So our current rule set is actually allowing me to do multiple different security events. So I've got a SAML expire, I've got the ADFS login, it's going to log me out. I'm also doing some other things such as masking information and those types of things. So I can have multiple different policies and rules inside of my policy in this example. Today, obviously, we're just talking about working with single sign-on. So it's really all about that ADFS or Okta configuration, because as long as it speaks SAML or ADFS, we really don't care what the end provider is. So it's an open standard from that perspective. So as long as it speaks SAML 2.0, we're good to communicate with it and configure against it. I'll actually hit on some of those other policies in a future webinar coming up, especially around data masking and things like that. But so the policy is built into the system, all configured there and controlled inside of your EBS system. So once again, kind of going back to that architecture, there is the plugin that goes on the web server. And what that plugin does is it utilizes these policies that are configured within your EBS system to be able to communicate out to that identity provider to allow you to utilize single sign-on to be able to communicate and authenticate into your EBS system. So that's really what I wanted to show you from just a little bit of the configuration perspective. Single sign-on really is a very quick delivery for us. We've been doing this for years across multiple different application sets, and this just extends into the EBS system to be able to provide that connection there as well. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here real quick. We just did the demo. So when we talk about why you would want to look at our delivered SAML solution versus a customized solution, one is going to be the implementation. You're going to be able to move very quickly to implement this, and you're no longer having to, have to support any sort of custom coding that you required. We've talked to a lot of different organizations who had kind of maybe built some single sign-on over the years, and it's very difficult to maintain. Typically, there's one person in the organization that actually knows how the whole thing works, and it's kind of stuck together with, as the old expression goes, like duct tape and baling wire kind of types of scenario. So this allows you to move to a more stable, tested product that's supported, that's used in ERP systems, and it really allows you to get and remove those customizations. So we have our standard support policies that are in play as well. So you have a company standing behind it that can support you, on 24/7. rather than being, a customized solution that you might have one or maybe two people inside of your organization that even understand how the process itself works. So from an implementation perspective, it really is much faster, much easier. So when we, one tip. So when we talk about some of the tips for successful implementation, it really is, it allows you to ensure a seamless interaction with your Oracle EBS. And what it does is it allows you to bring it into the rest of your environment, the way your other applications are already working. So that single sign-on just allows them to leverage and move into EBS just as quickly as they can the other applications that they use, which is going to make users happier. It's going to make your security admins much happier because it's going to allow you to bring EBS in line with what you're doing with the rest of the application sets as well. So you don't have to purchase additional hardware because it's not running through a proxy or standing up another web server in front of it. It's communicating directly from the EBS web server over to the identity provider. So, from that particular perspective, it is short on hops. You're not adding a lot of network latency or, bottlenecks to the system as well, because you do have that direct communication. So it avoids customizing the SSO solution because it's all delivered. And it also reduces the alterations that you're making inside of EBS. So when you're taking updates, processes, builds, any sort of, those types of images, patches and fixes, you can still take those because you haven't made changes to it. And additionally, one of the other features, and I haven't really talked on it much, is we fully enable the deep link integration. So when somebody has, a workflow email, deep embedded link, favorites, all of those types of things, our single sign-on fully supports those working inside of your system as well. So that's typically where a lot of custom solutions have issues and challenges. So, and additionally, you kind of saw the way my policies were set up. I have the option of working with multiple different identity providers. So if you as an organization decide 2 years from now that you're going to move from Okta to ADFS or ADFS to Ping, or whatever you're going to do at that particular point, it allows you to change over very quickly. It's not something that you've got some hard-coded code out there that is only going to work for a particular identity provider. As long as it speaks SAML 2.0, you're going to be able to communicate very easily with them. So it's really minimizing your ongoing costs of keeping the SSO up and running, and really allowing your employees to engage and be more productive inside of their environment by allowing the EBS system to integrate into your normal working single sign-on model. So it's going to make you more secure as an organization, and it's going to make your employees happier from the perspective of being able to continue and leverage their SSO. So I know Stephanie said that we would probably take about 45 minutes. Typically, SSO doesn't take that long. So really from the session today, it's kind of wrapping up, because single sign-on, especially the way we do it, is very direct. It's very easy. From a configuration and deployment, you're not talking about long-term implementation here. This is something that can be done very quickly and very efficiently inside of your organization. So with that, Stephanie, I will throw it back to you.
Thank you, Greg. Again, if you have any questions, please add them now into the chat box. We have a couple announcements for upcoming events. Our next webinar for Oracle EBS will be utilizing dynamic data masking in Oracle EBS, and that will be on October 20th. Thursday, October 20th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight. And then we have our Pathlock Innovation Series coming up. We would love if you attended that. That's on October 26th and 27th and November 2nd and 3rd. During this series, we're going to have multiple partners joining us to present on different topics, from SAP to Oracle to PeopleSoft topics, where every day we're going to have multiple sessions. So if you would like to come join that, please sign up for that. You can see the announcements for that on our LinkedIn pages for PathLock, or join our email list and you can sign up there. I don't think we have any questions for today. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you for attending, and we hope to see you next time.